Coming up in today's show, Elky shows us how to set up a Kamado Joe ready for cooking. Neal cooks a roast on Churny, his milk churn smoker. Our special guest is BBQ superstar Jess Pryles, aka Hardcore Carnivore, and she talks to us from Texas. Our dish of the week is inspired by Jess, and it's chili and lime pork chops. And we go on a journey around the barbecue community to take a look at what you've been cooking. Welcome to the Lockdown Barbecue Show. Welcome to the Lockdown Barbecue Show. We hope you've had a really good week. Now, this is program 11, and in program 10, Elky and I went on a road trip to Cranbourne. Elky, have you recovered yet?
Just about. We ended up having a bit of a party, didn't we? So hopefully we can get on the road and do more stuff like that over the coming shows. Now, we've got a bit of a busy show for you this week, so we're going to crack straight on with my how-to. In this week's how-to, I'll show you how I fire up the Kamado Joe, get it up to temperature, stabilise the temperature, and get it ready to cook. So when lighting a Kamado Joe or any other ceramic, it's always best to start with a small fire and then bring it up and heat it up slowly using the vents. Don't dump a chimney full of charcoal into the Kamado. It can shock the ceramic, it can crack the ceramic. And also if you've got a whole lit chimney full of charcoal in there, straight away you're going to get a really hot temperature and it's going to be a lot harder to stabilise. If you start with a small fire and bring it up slowly, it's going to be a lot easier to stabilise, and you'll find that you can run at a nice steady temperature for hours and hours. So first things first, of course, you're going to want your charcoal. We've got this hallmark charcoal, and we're just going to fill to the top of the fire basket or firebox. And then all we're going to do is just take the fire lighter, nestle it in there and get it lit. When firing up my Kamado Joe, I always start with the bottom vent fully open. We have the lid open, we have the fire lighter in, and after about 10 minutes, once we've got a reasonable fire in there, we then close down the lid and start dialing in the temperature using the vents. If you're doing a long cook, then you want to fill your fire basket as much as possible, still leaving a good bit of clearance between your basket and your heat deflectors. I'm not going for a long cook today, so we've got it about half full, which is enough for most cooks. So here we are, 10 minutes in, got ourselves a small fire going there. That's enough to close down the lid and start dialing in the temperature using the vent. If you're using a chunk of wood, we're going to pop that near the fire, and then we're going to go ahead and put our deflector plates in. Deflector plates are in. Of course, if you're cooking directly without deflector plates, then obviously you don't need to put these in. So now what we do is close the lid, top vent. We're going to open this main vent all the way, and as I've said, bottom vent is all the way open. So we're getting close to my target temperature of 200 Celsius. So what we're going to do now is move this main vent shut, and now we're going to adjust the temperature using a slider. So we're just going to open that up, and then down the bottom we're just going to close this down slightly to about 1 inch. And now it's just a case of keeping an eye on this and adjusting this accordingly. Just small incremental adjustments is all you need on a ceramic grill. So on the Kamado Joe, just moving it 1/2 inch is the difference between 10-20 degrees on here. So we're going to start here, and when we're at our target temperature, we're going to close this down until we dial in and sit nicely at 200. So we've hit our target temperature of 200 Celsius. We've used the top vent and the bottom vent to get us to this temperature and to steady us at 200. Now, you'll notice that there isn't a lot of smoke visible from here. That's because when you stabilise the temperature, you want to make sure that you don't have lots of grey smoke billowing out. You just want this nice, thin, wispy smoke. That's when you know you're stabilised. You're not going to get an acrid smell, acrid taste on your food from the smoke. We've got a nice clean smoke. We're dialed in at 200. We're ready to cook. So that's my how-to on how to light your Kamado, bring it up the temperature, stabilise the temperature, and get it ready to cook. Hope you found it useful.
Now that Kamado Joe setup looks really good. Now later on in the programme, Elky's Dish of the Week this week will also be cooked on a Kamado Joe. Now, one of my favourite parts of our show are our guest interviews. And this week we've got a barbecue superstar. Elky, would you like to introduce her?
She is indeed a barbecue superstar. She's co-founder of the Australasian Barbecue Alliance. She has her own line of world-renowned rubs. She has a best-selling book. It is indeed Jess Pryles, aka Hardcore Carnivore.
Jess, welcome to the Lockdown Barbecue Show. How are your family coping in lockdown in Austin, Texas?
We're doing pretty great here, to be honest with you, as best as anyone can hope to be during this time. Honestly, I've really enjoyed it, forcing me to be more at home than traveling and on the road, which has just meant more time in the backyard cooking and recipe testing. So,
Jess, you were obviously born in Australia and you're now a Texan by choice. Tell us about your journey. How did that come about, and what was your journey from Australia to Texas?
I mean, the only difference being that I'm now in Texas, I'd be willing to bet that our stories are pretty much all the same, which is that you ate barbecue for the first time and you fell in love with it. So that was my story, and it was just something I did when I was traveling through Texas, and that's what you do when you come to Texas. Like, even before this big renaissance of barbecue that we're experiencing now, Lockhart is officially the capital of Texas barbecue, and you would come here and you would, go two-stepping and ride a horse and eat barbecue. And so it was that first trip to Texas that I had that first taste and got hooked. And then I kept coming back and forth over the years. And it got to the point where it's like, all right, Pryles, you're pretty much going to have to move. And this is ridiculous. Like, it's time to call it a day and move and be closer to it. That's how I ended up here.
Jess, you're the co-founder of the Australasian Barbecue Alliance. What was the aim of the alliance?
I love that only a Brit or person from the Commonwealth can actually say Australasian properly. The idea was I co-founded the Australasian Barbecue Alliance with two other guys, Jay Beaumont and Adam Roberts, and Adam's still the GM now. And the idea was that barbecue was in its infancy in Australia, but it was still becoming really popular, and there was no kind of governing body. Its primary role is similar to, a KCBS or something. It sanctions competition barbecue. But also, I think there's something like 25,000, it's probably way more than that, members on the Facebook group, because it sort of became this community. So one half of it was just straight up sanctioning competitions as they got more popular in Australia. And another part of it was just providing a resource on low and slow for Australians, because they didn't really know what it was. Or, I mean, I'm sure it's very similar. Classic Australian butchery is similar to British butchery. So when you would go to buy a brisket in an Australian butcher, you would get a rolled trimmed flat. And so everyone was starting to look for places for advice on why is this different. That's kind of how my story happened too. I came back from one of my visits to Texas and couldn't figure out why briskets were different. And then that led me down the world of figuring out butchery.
Yeah, it's definitely very similar from Australia to British barbecue, I think. And like the whole, there is the issue of going into a butcher's and, like you said, asking for a brisket or asking for these certain barbecue cuts, maybe ribs, and you get ribs that are just shiners, like they've got no meat on them, and you take them back, and they don't understand what the proper barbecue cuts are. So I think in terms of British barbecue being on the level with Australian, I think that's pretty bang on.
Yeah, and the other thing, you talk about shiners, people getting into barbecue don't even know what shiners are. And that's part of it too, that they just buy pork ribs from their butcher and then they wonder why it was so expensive and why it was so unsatisfying because there was barely any meat on there. So it's a two-part learning phase. The first part is learning what you want to ask for and why. I think a lot of people, both in Britain and Australia, start off just, does this look right to you? Is this what the butcher should have given me?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Jess, obviously your brand Hardcore Carnivore is internationally acclaimed. You've obviously got the range of rubs, you've got the book, you've got the YouTube channel. What was the inspiration behind Hardcore Carnivore?
The inspiration behind Hardcore Carnivore was as simple as I'd already had a pretty great audience from having put out recipes on my website, and I had a pretty good audience on social media. But there was no way for people to try my food, other than making the recipes. And people kept saying, you're going to have a restaurant, you're going to have a restaurant. And everyone I know who has a restaurant is like, don't get a restaurant. So I wanted to have a way where people and people I was engaged with could try things that I thought were the right flavor profile. So black was the first seasoning that I came out with. And that was you know, it couldn't be more of a basic story of like, hey, I really like the way this stuff tastes, and I think that you will too. It wasn't ever I never went into it thinking that, 5 years later I'm going to have like a seasoning empire that's available around the globe, which is pretty neat. But it was born of a love of great flavor and wanting to share that with other people.
Do you have a favorite?
Blackout sells everything else, and I think one of the reasons is that I feel like I think this is where the Australian benefit comes into play, because I feel like our palate is much more understated than the typical American palate. So when you taste black, it's very much about letting the meat shine. It's low sugar. It's not like an in-your-face, like, look at me, I'm seasoning kind of thing. And that's why it's resonated, I think, so well with people around the globe. And the black color is cool. So I probably black, first child, oldest child has to be the favorite.
Jess, you designed your own offset smoker in 2017. Can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. That was a super fun project, and it was made with Pits and Spits in Houston. They still make them. They custom hand make them to order. And it was basically the result of having cooked on a lot of smokers, figured out exactly what I wanted to happen. I didn't change too much of the actual cooking functionality. We did make the firebox bigger because a lot of people don't realize that the smaller your offset smoker is, the harder it is to run. It's actually pretty simple or much easier to run one of those big 1,000-gallon smokers because you can light a big fire and go to town. So we made a few adjustments into how the smoker actually ran, but then a lot of it was just about practical additions for people who didn't have like a multi-$1,000 backyard kitchen, which was me, but needed certain things. So we extended the front so you could actually put a brisket down instead of having those ridiculous shallow shelves that you sort of have to hold it up with one knee while you're opening the smoker. And we put a roll on there, so when you're wrapping, because obviously wrapping in butcher's paper became really popular, we put something like that in. We put storage into it as well. So it was a combination of a few little functionalities, and just, I like to say it was just practical woman design, frankly.
It looks the business. It looks amazing.
Thank you.
You've also got a YouTube channel, haven't you, that you put out a lot of fantastic content. I've seen your Instagram TV and your YouTube channel. Have you got any kind of plans to develop that further? I mean, what are your plans for the channel?
Just keep putting out quality content. That if you build it, they will come. And I neglected video for a very long time, and I'm starting to give it the attention it deserves. And one of the things that's been really great for me personally, I love barbecue and I have a lot to do with it, but I am also a big fan of just meat and meat cookery in general. So part of it, you'll see, I usually release one recipe one week, and then the next week will be like a kind of meat science fact. So why do you tie meat? Why should you rest meat? How to pick a great ribeye? Because there's actually a lot that I've learned over the years that I'm really excited to share with people. And often people think that I'm a kind of one-trick barbecue pony. So it's been really, really great to show folks exactly, what we can talk about and what we can share. So that's what I've got more of planned. I've got more of that meat science, more answering those questions. I love doing that stuff. That's what drives me. That's what I learned along the way. I didn't even really cook steak before I started this whole thing because I was that person. I didn't really know how to choose the right cut at the grocery store. I didn't really know how to cook it. A couple of ex-boyfriends said 7 minutes each side, and we know that doesn't work. And so the whole thing just seemed like in the too hot basket. And then when you learn about how simple it can be with these basic practices of understanding fire and understanding temperature. So when I learned that and shared it with other people, I just love learning and sharing what I've learned. So that's my aim with the YouTube channel. It's not just about giving people another brisket recipe along with the 500 million that are already on the internet. It's about filling in other gaps to just give them great family meal experiences at home.
Jess, can you tell us the main differences between Texan barbecue styles and techniques and styles in different southern states?
Yeah, so traditionally, Texas was one of the only barbecue styles that had beef in it, and obviously it's because of the agrarian culture. So given that there were a lot of cattle in Texas, of course you had beef barbecue, and there were a lot of German and Czech immigrants too. So it was sort of a meshing of the German heritage of smoking meats with the cattle that they had. And Kansas City is due north from Texas. And in fact, there was a cattle trail where they used to drive the cattle up north to be processed and then shipped to the East Coast. So that's why Kansas City is the only other city where you do find brisket on the menu, although they do it a little bit differently. And then, of course, in the East Coast, you've got the Carolinas that's so famous for their hog barbecue, either whole hog or vinegar or mustard style sauces, which, of course, pair really well with pork, being that it's so fatty and needs something to cut through the richness. But the funny part is, you know, these regional styles have all but disappeared. And it's one of those, you know, it remains to be seen if it's a good thing or not. People are opening barbecue joints all over the country and all over the world, and they're cherry picking the best elements from the different barbecues. So you'll find pulled pork and whole hog. Like, we're having people do whole hog in Texas, and that's not at all part of our heritage. There's my little staffy. Sorry, I have to point out the elephant in the room. So you're getting, you know, you can go to a hometown barbecue in Brooklyn with this t-shirt, and you can get Jamaican style jerk ribs and pastrami bacon, but the best beef rib inspired by Texas. And it's the best of everything. So, hey, stop it. Sorry. So those are the traditions, but really you can walk into barbecue joints all over the world, and that regionality is slowly disappearing.
What advice would you give to a younger Jess, maybe, or people with less experience looking to start on their barbecue journey? Advice that you wish you had at the start, what would you pass on to others?
The best advice that I think I can give is, and I'm lucky because I started a little bit before the major YouTube influx of content being available. And I think that you can psych yourself out. Like, having YouTube instructions is very handy for some situations, like, you know, how to fix a flat tire or how to, you know, those random things around the house. But when it comes to cooking, so much of it is just intuitive and it's just practice. It's just you getting to know your grill, getting to know your smoker, getting to know how fire works, getting to understand how 2 different briskets from 2 different butchers are going to give you a completely different result. And sometimes I think logging too many armchair hours in front of YouTube before you've actually stepped up and tried to cook can be a little bit counterproductive, because nothing is going to be better for you than just experience and getting those cooks under your belt. And even today, with the amount of meat that I've cooked in my lifetime, which is a lot, there are still things that surprise me. There are still things that go awry. It's a natural organic product. The main thing is there's no magic number, especially when it comes to barbecue. So I know a lot of people look for, well, is it 203? Is it 210? And it just doesn't exist. So take it all with a grain of salt and just log the hours at the barbecue instead of the computer.
Jess, post-lockdown, what are your plans for the future?
Oh, to travel absolutely everywhere. I was only home like 1 weekend a year before this happened. So, well, sorry, 1 weekend a month. 1 weekend a year is a bit extreme. But so this has been really unusual for me, and I've enjoyed it a lot. But I get so inspired by going out and eating other people's foods and the way they put ingredients together, and that's what I miss more than anything. So I'm hoping. It'd also be nice to be able to see my family, because right now Australia has shut its little island doors. So that's just one of those.
Hopefully soon. Any plans to come to the UK?
I would love to. I haven't been to the UK since I was 12 years old, and I know that the rub is becoming more and more popular there, and that the scene is gorgeous, and y'all have some amazing butchers and amazing beef that I would love to come and try. So nothing is on the books immediately, but I'm really hoping that something happens soon.
We hope so too. We hope so too.
Jess, thank you for being a fantastic guest on the Lockdown Barbecue Show.
You bet. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jess. You've been amazing.
No worries. This was super fun. I appreciate all your work with the questions.
Elky, Jess is absolutely brilliant.
Oh, she is brilliant, and she was an absolutely great guest. Now, this week's dish of the week is actually inspired by Jess herself. On her website, she has many recipes, so go check it out. But this one is chili and lime pork chops. With such a fantastic guest on the show this week, Jess Pryles. This week's dish of the week is taken from her website, jesspryles.com. It's fiery chili and lime pork chops. We're going to be using Jess's Hardcore Carnivore red rub. Let's crack on. I'm going to be using these lovely pork chops from Philip Warren Butchers, and just as we did with the monster chop in one of the previous episodes, I've dried these, I've scored the skin, which will enable the fat to render down. So they're ready. We're going to go ahead and put on this Hardcore Carnivore red rub. We're going to fire up the grill and we're going to get these babies on. So the skin is scored, these are nice and dry. We're going to go ahead and just apply a coat of the Hardcore Carnivore red rub all over the meat. The grill I'm using today is a Kamado Joe Classic 3. The way I've set it up is we've got whole oak charcoal on one side that we've lit. We've got a grill grate directly above that, directly above the fire. On the other side, the indirect side, we've got a deflector plate in place, which is going to protect us from the heat. We've also got a grate above that where the chop's going to sit to finish off indirect. So let's go and show you how we cook these. So as you can see, we're set up with 2-zone cooking here. We've got our direct heat here with the grill grate directly above the fire. That's nice and hot. Over here, we've got a deflector plate in place. We've got the grill grate there. That's our indirect cool zone. So the plan is put the chops on, 2 minutes, give them a flip, give them a little go on the side with the scored fat, on the scored skin, and then pop them over indirect until they hit a nice 63 degrees internal. And then we're going to rest them, knock up the chili and lime salsa, and dig in. You can see, got a lovely colour on those now, absolutely beautiful. Now, we always like to face the fat towards the heat, so we're going to do that with these. So line them up, indirect, fat facing the heat, just to try and render it down a little bit further. And now we're just going to finish these off, lid back down until they're 63 degrees. The chops are off, they're resting, so we're now going to knock up the chili and lime salsa sauce. So, into a bowl, we're going to start with 100ml of orange juice. So we're going to squeeze that into there. To the orange juice, we're going to zest in a lime, and we're also going to add the juice of the lime. So in that goes. Next, we want the spice, so we're just going to finely dice this and add that into the bowl. So in we go with the chili. To that, we're going to go in with about 2 teaspoons of Worcestershire sauce, that'll do us. About half a teaspoon of salt and a couple of tablespoons of honey. And then we're just going to give that a good mix. It's going to be a thin consistency, that's fine. We're just going to use this to just drizzle over the pork as a kind of dressing. It's going to give us a sweetness, it's going to give us the kick of the chili, it's going to give us that nice citrusy flavour of the orange and the lime. It's going to work perfectly with the pork. I'm already excited, so let's get the chops back into play, drizzle this over and have a taste. So there it is, fiery chili and lime pork chops from Jess Pryles' website. Jess is the Hardcore Carnivore. This is dish of the week. We're going to slice in, see how we've done. Pork is nice and juicy throughout. It's perfectly cooked to 63 degrees. Don't take pork too far because that's when it starts to get tough, starts to get chewy. So let's just go in and have a taste. The flavours of that dressing, you've got the lime coming through, the citrusy, And you've got the spice of the chilli, which gives you a nice little kick to go with the pork. But then you've got the honey kind of bringing it and rounding it all up along with the pork. Sweetness, spice, citrusy, absolute winner. So that was a dish from Jess Pryles' website. Jess is the Hardcore Carnivore on the Smokin' Elk. That was Dish of the Week. Please give it a go, and I'll see you again next week.
Elky, your pork chops look fantastic.
Cheers, Neil. As you well know, and people that watch this show, I am a big fan of cooking pork chops on the barbecue.
And now it's time for What's Cooking. Some great photos of Elky. Which was your favourite?
I'm going to go with Brisk Barbecue this week, who did some cinnamon rolls. Just shows the versatility of cooking outdoors on the barbecue. Now, talking of versatility and cooking outdoors, you've been playing around with Churny again, haven't you? The milk churn smoker. Should we take a look and see what you've been up to?
I'm still getting to grips with temperature control on Churny, my milk churn smoker, and I wanted to give it another go. My wife wants to eat dinner at a set time, and we all know with barbecuing that can be quite tricky because it's done when it's done. But I have plenty of time on my hands, so I agreed. I lit a fire in the fire churn with fruitwood logs and waited. On my last cook, the meat was too smoky, and I didn't want to make the same mistake again. To keep the heat up, I added some lumpwood charcoal to the fire. My family wanted a chicken and dolciolata salad, and I thought this was the ideal opportunity to test Churny again. To help me out, I've bought Aaron Franklin's book to check out how he sets up his smokers. I simply seasoned the corn-fed chicken with sea salt and placed the bird in the cooking churn. The digital oven thermometer gave a reading of 17 degrees, and I set the alarm for 75 degrees. I had plenty of time on my hands, so I checked out the veg patch. It's doing really well. We have plenty of tomatoes, and the runner beans are making good progress. Sweet corn on the barbecue is delicious, and I'm hoping that it will be ready early September. After 90 minutes, the temperature of the chicken was only 35 degrees. It still had a long way to go. It looks quite a distance for the heat to travel from the fire churn, so I added some more lumpwood charcoal. After 3 hours, the temperature had only risen to 50 degrees Celsius. Now I was getting worried about getting the cook finished, letting the chicken rest, and being ready for our agreed time. I cracked on, and the good news is that we finally got to 75 degrees Celsius. Happy days. But now it's time for my confession. There was no way it was going to be ready on time, and I finished the cook on my Weber grill. The chicken was delicious. I hit the deadline, but failed again with Churny. I won't give up, as it's fun learning, and I'll have another go at the weekend. Next time, it'll be done when it's done.
I will have a successful cook on Churny, I promise.
I'm sure that Churny's destined to be a cold smoker, Neil.
I think you could be right. Now, who's our special guest next week?
And next week we're off to Canada, and we're talking to YouTube and Instagram star Smokin' Dad Barbecue.
That should be really good. Now, that's it for this week's show. Thank you so much for watching. A big thank you to our programme sponsor, Kamado Joe, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, and a big thanks from me as always, guys. Keep those fires burning, and we'll see you next week.